Hello, I'm Mortgage Mike, and welcome to another edition of your weekly mortgage industry update. Today's topic is on, so you're gonna keep your home. How many times have you been out there where you have a listing, or maybe you have a buyer that's buying a home and they decided that they're gonna retain their current residence? Well, it happens, and there's ways that we can handle retaining that current residence. But if we look back to the old days, I can remember way back when it used to be that we handled retaining of a current property a lot differently than we handle it today. And in fact, it used to be pretty easy because what we would do is we would just conjure up a lease on this property, would find somebody to lease it for us, and then what we can do is we would write off we would use 75% of the rental income towards their PITI, and we would move on down the road. Now, as long as we could qualify, great, not a problem. Close the transaction and bring on the next one. Well, that's just not the case anymore. In today's post-mortgage meltdown world, we're dealing with a far different scenario, and it's a much more restrictive scenario because when you're carrying two house notes, there's a lot more liability or a lot more risk to the lender that's involved. So we're scrutinizing that aspect a lot more deeply. So there's two ways that we handle this, and that is, the first way, if somebody tells me that they're going to be retaining their current residence, then I'm going to try to qualify them carrying both properties or both mortgage payments. If I can qualify them carrying both mortgage payments, great. That's the path of least resistance, and that's where we're going. If, however, they don't and they're going to retain and lease, then we have to look at another scenario, and that scenario is we no longer can get a lease and count 75% of the rental income towards their debt obligation, their mortgage obligation. We now have a new set of rules that we have to play by. So here's what we have to look at. First and foremost, if we're going to use a lease on a rental property, what we have to do is we have to document that we have a 30% equity position. A 30% equity position in that property, so that we can use a lease to offset the debt by 75%. So that's a to appraisal process in the transaction. We're going to have to send an appraiser out who's going to have to appraise the property. If we could get tax rolls to show it, that would work, but most of the time it doesn't. So we're usually using an appraisal. If that appraisal comes in and we can document we have a 30% equity position, then we can use the lease to offset the mortgage payment, which then helps us to qualify. Now, here's the interesting aspect, because it's just not as simple as qualifying. It's from a debt-to-income ratio perspective, we also have to have reserves. Reserves can be the killer for us because requirements from our investors state that they want 6 months reserves on the current residence that they will be leasing, right, retaining. And in most instances, they want 6 months reserves on the current home that they're buying. So you're looking at not only trying to make sure we have enough equity in the home to use a lease to offset the debt, we also have to make sure that we have enough cash left over after we go to closing so that we can have reserves for both the primary residence that we bought, the new one, and also the residents that we are retaining and leasing. So it's not as cut and dry as it used to be. So if you have clients out there that are telling you they're planning on retaining their current home, my suggestion is that they talk to a lender immediately, because they may not be able to do that. So I'm Mortgage Mike saying thanks for watching. Spread the love, heal the world, and I'll see you next week.